What's up, everybody? I'm the Man Goose. You are awesome, and today we're going to be talking about the fall of Gigantic. Now, there's some facts, some rumors, some suspicions, a lot of stuff that we don't know, and we never will know because we're not part of the Motiga team, and those are the only ones that really know, and it's all clouded by NDA. And I, of course, I never played Gigantic, so I know the least amount of this of anybody, so I brought in the TurtleDuckMan and FailcoPunch to help me out. So, the TurtleDuckMan, tell us a little bit about yourself, brother.
Hey, my name's Turtle. I am I'm a game artist in training right now. I play Gigantic ever since pre-alpha, so I've been playing it for a long time, following the game. It was one of, if not my favorite games just ever, and so I'm really excited to talk about, unfortunately, how it fell down.
Yeah. And also joining us from the team at Project Stamina is FailcoPunch. How you doing, Failco?
Hi, you have a really nice radio voice. Has anyone ever said that to you?
A couple times, yeah.
It does.
So yeah, I'm FailcoPunch. I am the art director on Project Stamina. I'm an artist. I do UI UX on mobile games professionally, and I was so obsessed with this game that I would bring my entire PC home during the playtest, so, during breaks, so I could be sure I played it. I also was one of the coaches that would be there at PAX helping them out, teaching people, and I streamed this game. And if you've seen this game, you probably recognize me as the person who raged a lot in all of her videos.
You probably recognize a lot of Falco's work on her YouTube videos because I use that a lot as a background. Thank you once again, Falco, for allowing me to do that since I have zero Gigantic footage.
I'm glad to help.
And then also, before we get into the meat and potatoes of this, I wanted to give a shout out to everybody in the Project Stamina Discord that participated in the conversation that brought this about. Everybody likes a little shout out. There was Meowstorm, Debonk, Lumberjack Requiem, Leah Amastika, Retro, The Plat Potato, Pouty Cottontail, and Flim. So thank you so much for engaging in this conversation with us. And if you are not part of the Project Stamina Discord, I'll have that linked in the video description below, and you can jump in there and talk with us. But we had this list that TurtleDuckMan posted of various reasons why Gigantic failed, and I did a little bit of research, added a little bit to it, and we're going to go through these one by one and discuss them, starting with Gigantic was originally going to be a Microsoft exclusive and was meant as promotional material for Windows 10. However, they didn't get the game ready by the time that Windows 10 launched. So the rumor is, this isn't, I can't back this up, I couldn't find any factual evidence of this, but the rumor is that Microsoft pulled a lot of their funding, if not all of their funding, yet still held Motiga, the company that made Gigantic, responsible for their end of the contract. So I don't know much about that. TurtleDuckMan, what do you know about that?
Yeah, so like you said, a lot of it's rumors. We know that they needed funding eventually because Perfect World had to save them from bankruptcy. And so we know that something took away the funding that they were originally given to by Microsoft, whether or not that was Microsoft pulling consistent funding or Microsoft just gave them a bunch and they wasted it all. That's kind of impossible to figure out unless we had a Motigan here. But
the game wasn't originally a Windows 10 exclusive. It actually... No, it was a lot of the game was actually built. It was something completely different. It was called Raid. It was like you have a team, you fight a giant monster with your teams. It was a completely different game. There's like art floating around with the characters. Margrave had weapons.
Margrave had weapons inside. Margrave still had weapons at the very beginning of Gigantic, didn't he?
I'm trying to remember that.
I think so. I'm pretty sure on his on the video that showcased him, he still had it. He had a bunch of, all of his abilities were exactly the same, but they all used weapons, which he still had the demon arm. So it was weird because he had the demon arm and also weapons. So his R&B was him flailing a mace all around, and his basic attack was this giant axe.
So it was a completely different game, though, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it was very different. It was too ambitious. It kept changing what it was over and over again. So during that time, before the Windows 10 deal, they were kind of flailing around. Like they didn't know what the game was going to be. They wanted to make something different. And I think they lost a lot of time and money like in that stage. And then, so like when Windows 10, like that deal finally came through, they got much needed money, but it kind of screwed them over in a lot of ways because, all of a sudden, all this coding, like they had the chat feature in the game long before that. They had to rewrite all that stuff. There wasn't chat in that game for a while. They had to like remake the game from the ground up after that deal.
So, and that's something else that TurtleDuck was saying, was that because of all those rewrites, they ended up with a lot of spaghetti code, right?
Yep. So there was a lot of like rewriting the code because they had to make it work with it's UWP, I think, the Universal Windows Platform. Yeah, that's what it is. Because Microsoft basically told them, okay, now you have to make your game run on our platform, but they were still using Unreal Engine 3, and they had to like combine those and make them work with each other, and so they lost a lot of development time to that. That led to a lot of the spaghetti code. They kind of had to rewrite the whole engine to work with that thing. Not to mention, when Microsoft didn't tell them how to code in that system, because the documentation just wasn't really great. So they had to like figure out a lot of stuff on their own, which led to a lot of bugs that they just had no idea how to fix, because there was so much technical debt that they just couldn't fix a lot of things. And for people who aren't super savvy to programming, technical debt is basically where you have a bunch of systems that you build up by themselves, not thinking about how they'll interact with the whole system as a whole, and then you have to go back and fix those and rewrite them basically to make them fit with the whole. So the more systems you have that don't work with each other and are kind of like roughly written, the more technical debt you have.
Okay, so that was kind of the first domino that started the chain, it seems. Would you agree with that, Falco?
Yeah, I would say like it might have been a godsend to get that money at that time, but I feel, and I'm not entirely sure, but it sounds kind of like they didn't get the extra people they needed to help them actually reach the goal and reach the milestones that Microsoft wanted for them. So that kind of, it makes me mad, but what can you do?
We're all mad.
Yeah, I get mad about Paragon. This one I can look at a bit more objectively, I think.
Yeah, especially like if I feel bad that you haven't gotten to play it, but at the same time, like you have dodged the bullet of just like the pure despair that I felt when this game.
Yeah, that's true. The worst part was when they announced that the servers were shutting down 6 months before the servers actually shut down. So you were just playing the game like hollowly, like I can't try because there's no reason to get good at the game anymore.
Yeah, and the final stream. I just have to mention.
The final stream was
stream, people couldn't even get into their accounts. So, and it was hosted by Motiga. It was
hosted by SoFetch. At that point, all of Motiga had been fired.
It was the full like extent of like how much things had crumbled. Like you couldn't even log in for your last few games. Man.
Yeah, it was a really good stream though.
Yeah, that sounds terrible. It sounds way worse than what happened with Paragon.
Yeah, Gigantic was like such a cult.
Well,
a lot of Lynical fans.
Yeah.
And so we just like we all loved the game so much that it made it that much worse when it eventually came crashing down.
Yeah. Whenever Paragon went down, a lot of my subscribers were like, "Hey, you should try this Gigantic game." I instead went with Smite, which was a not a good decision. I really wish I would have played Gigantic, even though by that
time
was
it a good decision though, or was it a bad decision?
Because I played Smite for about a month and was like, "Fuck this shit, I'm out."
You did probably dodge the bullet of grief, like we were saying. Though.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
And now we got Project Stamina, so hopefully you'll get to experience.
Hopefully so. I've already The alpha has the one little alpha test session I did was amazingly fun, and I just cannot wait for another one.
Yeah,
Me neither. I'm excited.
It's coming along good.
At least, I will say this, like, Project Stamina, at least, like, we can look at Gigantic objectively now and be like, okay, like, they have so many amazing ideas. Like, how do we take that and skip the part where we're, like, trying to figure out what this game is, like over a long span of time? So, at least for us, like, that's really helpful. Although I really, really would have loved to see Gigantic as the game Raid so bad.
Yeah.
I think it would have been cool. I mean, you got your giant monster, you're fighting it. That's fun. I like giant monsters.
Back in Raid, I believe it was a totally PvE game, right? Or was it?
So.
Yeah. So I think because like the idea was that they were trying to make like MMO raids into like a whole game, just that.
Okay. Kind of like Monster Hunter?
Yeah, it was kind of like Monster Hunter if the monster was less of like an NPC, like a creature you were fighting, and more of like an entire set piece.
Kind of like Dauntless, actually, now thinking about it, which came along later. I wonder if they were inspired.
It's more, I think it's closer to like the siege fights in Monster Hunter, probably, where you were fighting the monster, but a lot of it wasn't attacking. It wasn't just like, okay, the monster's in the middle of the arena and you fight it. It was like the monster's moving around and you have to like dodge its huge attacks. So it's closer to like fighting the Dalamadur in Monster Hunter, which honestly they probably got a lot of inspiration for like Gren, the Naga Guardian, from that. Well,
speaking of other games, that's part of our list here. Is the launch of Gigantic was kind of overshadowed by I wouldn't even say similar titles, but they, from the outside looking in, looked a bit similar, which was Overwatch, Battleborn, and Paladins, and that could have led to a lot of people never checking out Gigantic, especially with Blizzard dropping such a huge game as Overwatch. And, Overwatch is first person. It didn't have nearly the depth that Gigantic did. However, it's still a hero shooter, sort of, and a lot of people would have looked at both of them, saw that, you get to choose different heroes that have different abilities, and they would have, just went with Overwatch because it's Blizzard, and Blizzard has tons of money to spend on advertising and such.
Yeah, I know that I actually, when both of the games, back in like 2015, when both of the game, like right after PAX 2015, which was when like, was that? No. That was Overwatch was like in its, like, it had been announced, but it was like in beta, and it was like in closed beta. I remember I applied for the Gigantic closed beta, and I applied for the Overwatch closed beta, and I was probably equally excited for both. Unfortunately, fortunately, probably because I didn't get into the Overwatch closed beta, but I did get into the Gigantic closed beta. So that might have honestly been a deciding factor for me whether or not I played Gigantic. Luckily, I got pushed towards Gigantic. But I definitely think that Overwatch was similar enough in its general goal of pick a character, like pick a main, like Smash Bros. Learn your character, like other MOBAs, but more like other MOBAs like League, but more fast paced. And like you said, the fact that it was made by Blizzard and they just have like Blizzard could launch anything and people would play it, which is unfortunate from an indie game perspective. But that's just kind of how large game companies are these days. And so definitely I think that Paladins probably a little less, because I think that Paladins piggybacked off the success of Overwatch. I feel like Paladins might have been less successful if Overwatch hadn't been a thing.
Right. Yeah. It was like a free to play, like a free.
Yeah, exactly. That was like where Paladins got a lot of its player base, was like people who are like, Overwatch looks cool, but I don't want to pay full price for a multiplayer game.
One of the real edge of Overwatch was just it was very easy to just pick up. You could really just be dropped in, play any character, and like you pretty much know what to do, where to go. In Gigantic, the learning curve, there's a lot more factors to learn. It was a lot harder for players just to like get into. I remember telling my friends, like, hey, you should play Gigantic with me. And then they're like, nah, I've been playing Overwatch a lot, and it's just like you could not get them to switch. It was heartbreaking just because that game, you know, it looked good, it functioned correctly. Gigantic had a lot of bugs. So
Gigantic had a lot of bugs, although some of them were beneficial, like all the Woo animation cancels, which were hilarious.
let's not talk about that character. Right
No,
now.
Woo was good. Woo needs to be brought back.
Well,
No!
I actually got into the Overwatch closed beta, and I had never even heard of Gigantic. I think I would have preferred Gigantic, to tell you the truth, because I like a game that has a little bit more depth to it. And
Yeah.
Overwatch, I played all through the beta. It released, I bought the game, and I have not touched it since.
I remember, I know my friends played Overwatch a lot, and I went through the same thing as you with Falco, where I was trying desperately to just come, please play this game. It's so good. It's free. Just download it. I got them to play like 3 games with me, and they just never played it again. And I think like there's just a mentality of like you play this one multiplayer game and you're like, I'm a League player, I'm an Overwatch player, and you don't want to play other games that are in that similar vein for whatever reason. And so it made it really hard to try and show the game to people because they're like, oh, that just looks kind of like Overwatch, but with melee characters. And that should be really cool. But for some, it might be a bit sunk cost fallacy. People are like, I put all this time in Overwatch, I don't want to move to a whole new game. Playing a multiplayer game, in my opinion, takes a lot of like time commitment. To get to play a multiplayer game consistently is like, I remember at its peak, I was playing Gigantic like 3 hours a day every day. I would just like that was my free time. That's what I would do. I would get home and I would go, okay, cool, launch Gigantic, turn on the stream, let's play. And that was like the best days. But
I'm not gonna lie, like there were days when Gigantic was out, like my work from home, I was just playing that game all like don't tell anybody that, but
you just told how many however many subscribers.
Something interesting that like Overwatch did was they had the ability to switch out people who were leaving matches, which I think was huge. It turned it into more of like a casual experience, but it was easy. If you weren't having fun, you leave. It's okay. The team will probably be okay. Somebody's filling their spot. Gigantic didn't have that. So people would leave the game and your team would literally be screwed. You know, if you're down a player and you're trying to learn the game, you're probably not going to have a lot of fun if your team, you know, 2 people leave on your team. It's now 3v5, you know, it gets a little hard. So I think like for people who kind of like, I'm not having fun, I'm leaving, like Gigantic wasn't for those people.
Yeah.
And it hurt it a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And that goes into more of like a core design of Gigantic is like, you look at Gigantic, because we're comparing it to Overwatch right now. Overwatch games are like 7 to 10 minutes. That's your match. In Gigantic, they can go anywhere from 5 to 35 minutes. And so a lot of people, like if they're losing or if they're in a stalemate or like they just have to leave because they've been playing for so long and their mom is yelling at them or something like that, they'll have to leave. And it had no system in place to prevent that from happening. It had like there were like penalties for deserting a game, but they usually were less time than what would have if you had stayed in the game, which is like like they were usually like it was like 1 minute and then 5 minutes and then 20 minutes. But like if you left one game that was going to go on for another 20 minutes and you only have to wait 5 minutes to play again, and that game was like a slog, that's like that was just a better deal for a lot of people. And that made it really like people leaving the match was really frequent. And it might have been partially because of like just people not taking the game as seriously. I know I see that a lot in like when I play, like I just played the beta for Bleeding Edge, and I know that was a terrible problem where people would just leave and then just because they didn't care because, oh, it's a beta, whatever, I don't care. So like that might have contributed to people leaving. It also could have been M&R stuff, which I know we have on the list to talk about later. But there was no safety net for that. When someone left, they left. And the way Gigantic was structured as a game, it was very hard to win a 4v5 game, which is another issue.
Well, let's move on here to one of the other problems. When the game launched on Steam, you had to download Arc as well as the game in order to play it. I don't like having to download anything other than the game whenever I'm down. I know it's kind of dumb, but like if I go to download a game on Steam and it's telling me you need to download this or that or this other thing just to play this game, I'm like, nope, done. I'm going to move on to a different game. So I think that probably played a little bit of a part in it.
Yeah, definitely. I know I hate downloading things in general. So if I hadn't already been invested in the game, I probably wouldn't have downloaded it because of that.
Yeah, I remember the Arc launcher. No one liked it. I remember and at the time, I think the game still didn't have like in-game voice. So you not only had, your extra launcher step, you had to go into Discord and find a way to talk to your teammates.
Yeah.
So
no, I think it did have in-game voice at that point. Yeah, I think it had in-game voice at that point, although it wasn't great.
Sorry, all the timelines are blending together in my brain.
Yeah, there's a lot of builds, a lot of versions.
But yeah, like the Arc launcher, I wish it didn't have to exist, but hey, it's not on my computer anymore. Woo!
It was on my computer for a long time after Gigantic closed. I just didn't want to get rid of it.
So
yeah, it's like
the next one here,
bad, really.
what we were talking about earlier, where they had spaghetti code and they were never able to go back and fix it. It led to a bug, I guess. You guys confirmed this one for me, where you couldn't play on PC unless you had 8 gigs of free RAM.
It was 6 gigs of free RAM, but because it needed to be free RAM, you basically needed 8 gigs of RAM to run the game. Because most computers go from 4 to 8 to 16.
Right.
And you also need RAM to just have your computer on. Like some small amount of RAM is always used. So you mostly needed like 8 gigs, which was, definitely a problem.
Yeah, and I know for me, sometimes I would have problems where like the game would have like a memory leak and lead to crashing.
Memory leaks were definitely a problem.
So that, those are kind of problems that you don't really want to have. They're kind of like blockers. They should be blockers to a game like being out, but they had a problem kind of like getting big problems like that fixed quickly enough. And they became really annoying for a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, from what I saw, there's workarounds for it. However, why the hell would you do a workaround to play the game whenever you could just move on and play something else,
Yeah, it kind of like makes the case for itself, It's like, hey, I'm gonna make this like really annoying to download and play, and it kind of like, it makes me really mad.
Yeah, the other problem with it was that it just everybody took that and they just crushed the game in reviews. Like there was just a lot of negative reviews. I don't think I can actually find the page anymore to see all the reviews. No, I don't think we can search for it because it's off Steam. But there was a lot. It had like, the game ended up with like mixed reviews thing
which is
when you look at it on Steam, which is basically a death sentence on Steam, especially when you're like an indie game that no one knows what it is, and it's you're basically the only advertising Gigantic had was going to PAX a couple of years. But they only did that a couple times, and they only hit so many people. You can show a lot of people your game at PAX, but only so many.
And that's on our list too. The poor reviews. It's kind of a mob mentality when it comes to different games. We were talking about this like with No Man's Sky. At a certain point, it becomes cool to shit on a game, and when that happens, you're done. You are done for, because people aren't even going to try the game to see if they like it. They're going to see everybody else just giving it, terrible reviews, and they're just going to review it terribly themselves just to be fun. And people like being right in that situation. They like to say, this game is dying, this game is dead, and then they want to be proven correct on that. So, I mean, that's just a weird sort of internet thing that we have now, and it's kind of a mob mentality, and I think that And if I look at a game on Steam and I see mixed reviews, I'm moving along.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because there would be times where you're watching a streamer play Gigantic. They're in queue for a while, and then they look at the camera and they say dead game. Like, you're saying that to everybody watching. Like, you're declaring how you feel about the game. Of course, everybody's going to feel that way. And yeah, why would people pick it up after you say that? Like, people would come back because they're obsessed with it, because they were, they thought they were good at it or whatever, or just because the game was pretty fun. It was fun, but it's like everybody soon had that negative kind of energy and like the Discord and the community, and it kind of snowballed its way along.
Yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, it was definitely palpable in like the Discord, which is just like the mentality. Like, for the veterans, it was a joke, but for a lot of people, it wasn't. And I know I tried my hardest never to like joke about haha dead game, because I was one of the people who were like, guys, stop. That's what's making people not play, because we're calling it a dead game. I know for me, a lot of the reason I'll play a game is for its future. Like, I'm not a hyper competitive person, but I like playing a game to get better at it, to then be able to play it for a long time. I like treating it as like a new relationship almost with this game. And so like, just like with relationships with people, if I don't see it going anywhere, I'm just going to cut it off. I'm not going to continue that relationship. And so I don't know how many other people view games like that, like me, but it's got to be some. And so that's another reason, is just like, you look at it and you're like, oh, here's this community of people saying the game is dead. Why should I put time to invest into playing this game when it's not going anywhere?
Right. So we kind of jumped ahead there, but let's head back to the gameplay issues, and this is the one where you guys can really educate me on this. And TurtleDuck, you were saying the main game mode was laid out in such a way that it was very easy to feed, which led to frustration.
Yeah, this one might be a bit contested. This was just my opinion from playing the game for a long time. I know a lot of veterans and a lot of different people who played the game had varying opinions on how the main game mode worked, whether or not it worked, whether or not it was good, whether or not some parts of it were good, or the whole thing needed to be changed. For me, I really liked the game mode, and I think that overall, holistically, it was a really good game mode. But there were pieces of it, mainly the fact that the whole game mode was based around power. And so power was the entire thing, because you couldn't win the game if you didn't have power. And that was like the whole point of the game. And that's a really cool like avenue that they explored. But what it led to is like dying, like going back to comparing it to Overwatch, dying in Overwatch loses you a bit of pressure on the objective, which has the potential to be utilized by the enemy team to further their winning of the game. In Gigantic, dying directly and unrevocably pushed the enemy team towards victory. Like, because auto wounds were a thing, because Guardians dealt damage to each other on attack, getting power was always 100% of the time guaranteed to push you further to victory. Whereas, so dying in the game always helped your team, and they didn't need to capitalize off of it at all. If they did capitalize off of it, it was even better for them, but there wasn't that chance that they didn't. Unlike a lot of other games where dying just kind of like you're not there to defend anymore, so now they can keep pushing forward. In Gigantic, it directly added numbers in a very countable sense to the enemy score almost, which is kind of like team deathmatch is that, but in Gigantic, since it was so much longer than like a normal team deathmatch, and it had so many other things that were kind of like the tendrils stretched out all over the place and just made it a problem.
Yeah, like to that point, it was kind of like you would get in a game and you would immediately be able to tell who was new to the game. And it would almost be like you would have to start babysitting them and making sure that they weren't just going off on their own and getting killed, or, the game didn't really lend itself to teaching you in a lot of ways. It was like, here's a bunch of points on the map, maybe go put something there. People would summon a thing, leave it, and leave. And that thing would obviously get killed. And so it would be kind of like this race between you trying to like corral your team to do the right thing with using only one ping that you had available to you. And it became kind of like frustrating, even if you knew the game, to watch your team either run into the enemy monster, and get annihilated, or put things down, leave them, and then just like kind of give the enemy team like free kills, free power. It became frustrating for like both sides. And I'm sure the new players were like, they just wanted to know what was going on.
Yeah, and because the power was because you basically needed 10 kills for a rampage. Like that's how many max you needed. But really, since over the course of a rampage, you'd almost always get at least 2 power orbs just because of the way the game was set up. So really you only needed like 6 kills. And so now if you have somebody that dies 20 times in a match, they've given the enemy like 3 rampages, just that one person dying. And so one person feeding a lot was able to shift the balance of the game substantially, which is kind of where I think the main problem with this point lies, is that that one person feeding was enough to basically throw the game.
Well, I mean, there need to be repercussions for deaths, but it does sound like
you always want
a little bit too much.
Yeah. And I mean, like most games, obviously the person who's the weakest link is going to determine the game, right? But in this game, there just wasn't enough to teach people what to do. And I think, and the game wasn't around long enough for them to learn either. So it just became like, if you wanted to play and you knew how to play, you either had to direct the shit out of your team or you have a good chance of losing.
And then next up, as far as gameplay issues, apparently the MMR system was so long at high ranks that it encouraged smurfing, which is a problem in quite a few games. So, I mean, Falco, I'm sure you were pretty high ranking there. Was smurfing an issue?
I mean, I did it too.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like the frustrating thing was that you would start learning the game, and then the game was released, right? And the MMR system was put into place. And if you were part of the beta or the alpha, you had a lot of knowledge, like over everybody else. You would easily like kind of breaking through the ranks. And there became times where if you wanted to play with your friends and you were both somewhat higher on, the top 100, you would wait for half an hour, even more. Just to get a match, because the discrepancies in MMR were that different. And that really sucks because you want to play. But so it definitely encouraged smurfing. It encouraged like making a new account. And in a way, you're like, oh, I can try a new character or do this. But, you went back to your characters you liked and won a few games, right?
You get pissed off, and then you just switch to your main, and you're like, I'm going to show these guys how it's done. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's not like the right thing, but there was kind of like a trend of people doing it. And so you would run into other smurfs. You'd be like, oh, I wonder who that guy is. It wasn't great, but in a way, like, even if you did smurf, you would still have the totally new people on your team, and literally having to carry a team by yourself. That was kind of fun. But at the same time, it's like, am I ruining the game right now? Like, is this a bad thing?
That's gotta be a terrible experience for those newer players. Like, I mean, if you're fighting Smurfs against Smurfs, that's all well and good for you. You're still having a fun time. They're just getting their shit kicked in.
And I remember I was like on a Smurf. I just wanted to record goddamn gameplay video for Trip. And one person on my team left. It was a 4v5, and I freaking worked my ass off in that game, and my team won. And at the end of that game, the enemy team, one of them sent me a message and said, "Try hard much?" And I'm just like, bitch, please. I worked hard for that.
Xbox messages.
Yeah, it was. But, you know, smurfing is never like a good thing, and I think it definitely led to new players getting frustrated, which really sucks. I have no excuses. I was just following the trend.
Yeah, although I don't think anyone really blames you, honestly. It definitely wasn't a good thing to do, but when you have this game you love and you're sitting in queue for 30 plus minutes, like that's just ridiculous.
It was terrible. I could not use my main account because it would be like 40 minutes. And Motiga broke my account and they unlocked all the skins, and they were like, "Don't show this." So I was like, okay, never using this again.
Now I just remember that one clip of SoFetch. He's like, the command to unlock infinite money is like $get money 1000.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
It wasn't, but he said it on stream one time and it was just a meme.
Oh no.
Well, let's move on to the next problem here. So the workflow system led to each build requiring 30 days to approve. So, like, trying to fix bugs and do patches and stuff took 30 days?
I believe so. Again, that one is a little less confirmed, but I'm fairly confident in that. It's just like that's what the Xbox approval time is. Like, it needs to go, you need to submit a build, and then that build needs to be approved through Xbox so that it can then be put on the Xbox store. And that approval process takes about a month. And that's why they did monthly updates. And those were the only updates we got, where every month they had an update. And while that's fine for some games, for a game like Gigantic, where there were a lot of bugs and the meta shifted wildly, and like some characters were broken and some characters were useless, and then they needed, I mean, they weren't really that bad. Gigantic's balancing overall was really good, but there were a lot of bugs that just couldn't be fixed because they couldn't fix it until the next build was out. And on top of that, what would happen is they needed to put things into because I was talking, I believe it was to SoFetch about this. They needed to put builds like to the approval process like months in advance. So like when we got like a February build, that February build was put into the approval process in like November. So like there would be bugs in it that they'd had already fixed but couldn't talk about because like because it was already they couldn't because everyone was complaining about bugs that were already fixed but weren't in the build yet because the builds were so far away from they released so far away from when they were actually like put into the approval system. And that led to like confusion between the devs and the players and people complaining about bugs that might or might not have been there. And just if people found a bug in a new build, then they'd have to wait another month that bug fixed. And that definitely led to like there was definitely a couple times when like, oh, whoops, I guess Ashling's just broken because they accidentally had to put a bug in that gives her 2 Cadors. Now I don't want to play the game anymore because Cador or everyone's playing Ashling and there's no way to fight against her. So I definitely think a lot of people probably left due to things like that, or like when Ramsey was broken back when he could just take you for 300 poison damage.
Oh yeah, there were definitely a few things that, I mean, like all new characters, right? They're always overtuned, but yeah, getting rid of that, it took a long time. And that character was really nasty. And if there was a Ramsey on the other team, didn't matter if they were good or bad at that character. He could slice through you like paper.
And then there was Vadasi. Well, luckily, most people didn't know how to abuse her. Like Samurai Toast or like the couple other people that were absurd Vadasi players. You just see them on the other team. You're like, well, let's waste 15 minutes, I guess.
Oh yeah, the Vadasi had the laser beam while she was healing people. It was just there were a lot of things characters could do in that game that found abuses for.
Definitely. And then because of the approval rating being or approval time being so long. I think that a huge piece of multiplayer games being able to thrive, especially in specifically indie multiplayer games, because like AAA multiplayer games are gonna happen because they're AAA multiplayer games, and that's just kind of a symptom of the industry we're in right now. Is like people will always play AAA games. Kind of goes back to my point earlier about game longevity. People will always play AAA games because they always know people will play AAA games, and so they always know this game will be here. That's why Smash Bros is so popular and Rivals of Aether isn't, even though they're basically the same game. Everybody knows there will always be people playing Smash Bros because it's Nintendo, but like who the heck knows what Rivals of Aether is? So I'm not going to put any time into it. Exactly. It's just a platform. It's another platform fighter similar to Smash Bros. But I've lost my train of thought. I went too off the tracks. You get the point, though. People wanted... No, I definitely lost my train of thought.
Let's move on to the next one then, which is the one that you'll see the most when you search, if you were to search on this topic, which is they secured $20 million from Perfect World Entertainment, and then they just kind of blew it all on conferences and setting up massive rooms at different conferences like PAX and stuff like that. So that $20 million was completely gone by the time that the game launched. What do you guys know about this? Falco, I know we were talking about this a little bit earlier.
Yeah, Perfect World was really interested in trying really hard to keep the team, to make the game, but the team, I think, wanted to finally do some marketing. They finally wanted to, bring the game to conferences. They would, as much as I loved it, like, they would fly people out from the community to coach at PAX, me being one of those people. And they would put them up in a hotel, which is like amazing, but I felt like that was the wrong move. Like it was like too early to do something like that when their game still had a lot of problems, and they didn't have a lot of like post-launch content. They didn't even have a lot of tutorial stuff in place at that point.
So what you're saying is that you're the reason that Gigantic failed? Like
I killed Gigantic.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Shit.
Bilko, Baz, Rezo, all killed Gigantic.
I mean, like,
it was Rezo having the top, 5 out of the top 10 spots on the leaderboard.
There were, what am I gonna say? Oh yeah, they also tried really hard to get like paid top streamers to play the game and advertise the game. We had people like Lyric who actually played the game. And I remember them telling us, do not fight these guys. We want them to like our game.
Oh my God.
Yeah, didn't they pay Lyric some obtuse amount of money for him to play the game?
You have to pay big streamers to play your game. That's that's their business. And,
like it was absurd how much they paid for him, and then nobody came from that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
It was really frustrating.
Yeah,
like more people came to Project Stamina from you, Mongoose, than people came to Gigantic from Lyric, and there were like 40K people watching that stream.
Yeah, it's true. And it was disheartening, like you go to a convention, you teach people about the game, they wait in line for half an hour, 40 minutes, then they never play again. Yeah, it's just like it had no way to kind of keep people playing, I guess because there was only one mode, the entire time. And they're like, I'm really curious, like where some of that money went other than just conventions, because it seems like maybe they didn't hire all the people they needed to really get that code done. But I mean, hey, I can't complain. I got to stay in a hotel and get some swag. So
I always wanted to do that. And the game wasn't around long enough for me to get good enough to do that.
Yeah, well, try being a girl streaming the one game, I mean, that'll happen.
I think I was talking about this earlier. This is really one of those hindsight 2020 sort of things. If the game would have been like they blew their $20 million not on the game but on marketing the game. If the game would have been massively successful, they would have looked like fucking geniuses. Like people would have looked back and been like, wow, they really they took a gamble by spending all their money on marketing, but look how it paid off. But instead the game failed, and it's like everybody looks at that like what an idiot. Like
Yeah.
Like, why did they do this? Why didn't they just spend money on fixing the code and making the game better?
That's how everything works, isn't it? The history's written by the winner and all that jazz.
It sucks because, like, I don't want to call their team dumb at all. Like, they were a bunch of amazing artists and they had very creative ideas. It's just, I feel like this game is just too ambitious for the timeline. Like, maybe if they had more done before the Microsoft deal, or maybe if they didn't have to rewrite the game, this would be a completely different conversation. But it seems like there were so many things in their way by the time they got to this point. I wonder what the energy of the team was at this point. It must have been really low.
Yeah, there was also...
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, there was one point when I remember talking to So Much Monsters, who's the character, I think the lead character, Freedom Mother, and he was saying that they made like character mastery skins for no money. They just did it because they wanted us to have them. That's like where they were at the end of that cycle. Like, people couldn't get paid.
Yeah,
before
well, I mean,
Perfect World came in.
I mean, there was that whole like whole super inspirational. I mean, less inspirational now that the game's dead, but when at the time it was super inspirational. Where at the end, when they ran out of Microsoft funding, I think it was a whole month, right? It was some ludicrous amount of time for what happened, where everyone just came to I don't know who exactly made the announcement, but somebody came out onto the studio floor and they were like, "We're out of money. We can't pay you." They obviously didn't say it like that, but that was the message that happened, and everyone still showed up to work the next day.
Yeah.
And they did it for a month or some amount of time closest to that, where they just showed up to the game with no pay because they were that passionate about it. And luckily, within that time, they were able to secure the funding from Perfect World. Unluckily, it didn't go anywhere. But the people were really passionate about the project, which is just unfortunate that it ended up not panning out.
Yeah, it's kind of the same way with Paragon. The team itself behind Paragon, amazing. The people in charge over there at Epic, not so much.
Yeah, and it's hard when you have to, work for a publisher. Like, there's timelines you got to hit, and if you're not going to hit them, either the approval process is going to take even longer, or, I mean, they're going to lose confidence in you and possibly stop funding you. So
people invest money and they expect a return, and if they're not getting a return, they have every right to pull their money.
That's why Project Stamina is in a good spot right now, because it's working on no timeline basically. So you guys have free reign to just make it as good as possible for as long as possible.
Other people might disagree with you. They might say, why the fuck is the game not out yet?
Yeah, Falco, why don't we have 17 playable characters?
Hold on, let me code right now.
The
game's done now.
Where's all of my concepts? I sent you all my concepts. Why am I not a character model yet?
God, I'm sorry. I'm so bad.
I'm not good enough to be a character model.
Let's move on now to it said it was very hard to herd the game, very hard to learn the game, and there was no tutorial system. That's another problem that Paragon shared, and it had a confusing UI. So can you guys explain that a bit? I don't know which one of you wrote that one.
I wrote that one.
Falco.
Yeah, like when the game first launched, there wasn't a tutorial at all for it. It was like really, and it's a hard game to learn. There's 2 monsters. It's kind of like a base, but it's not. There's points to control. Kills also factor in. There's something called wounds. You got to move forward and attack the enemy guardian with your guardian. There's a lot going on here. And there's also your ultimates and the fact that all of your abilities upgrade, not just once, but twice, and you can make different builds, with each character. There's a lot of stuff, and it was very difficult to find all this information unless you were actually playing the game, because you were like, people would sit there. I would see this all the time. They would be like trying to upgrade their character, trying to read it in the middle of battle, and they're like, I don't know what I'm doing. And you're like, I wish I could help you. Like when the game was it alpha or beta? There used to be actual coaches that they would have to
I think
like
that was
training
both.
sessions. Yeah, that like a group of people that have been playing the game, just community members for a while, would sit in Discord and you could ask them, "Hey, I'm interested in learning Margrave. Like, what would you suggest?"
That was back in Mumble, wasn't it?
I don't know. I remember Discord, maybe question mark. Maybe maybe it was the Arc client.
I think that was either Mumble. No, because GameFox was just for core.
Oh, you're right. It's obviously not Arc. I can't remember. Anyway, like something like that was so cool. Like being able to talk to people who were good and they actually give really good advice, and it was easier to learn the game. I just wish something like that carried, through to the end. And maybe in a way, like that's on us as community for not like doing that more and helping people. But it's like at the same time, your game really should have that in place because there's a ton of things to learn about each character.
Yeah, tutorial is definitely the company's responsibility, not the players.
Yeah, so to that point, the game did have a tutorial. I believe it came out later on. So a big thing with the game is that it kind of soft released, quote unquote, like a year or so before like the actual official release when it released on Steam, but it was in basically open beta for a long time. And when it transitioned to release, there wasn't really a change much, but at some point they did put at some point before the actual like release date, the official release date, they did put in a tutorial. It wasn't a great tutorial. It did go through some things, and they did require you, I believe, to do it before you were allowed to play any matches. Honestly might have been a turnoff for some people, having to do a tutorial before you were allowed to do anything. But they did have it. I think personally, and I'm probably biased because I played the game for so long, so I know it. I don't think that a lot of the systems were super complex, but they definitely weren't portrayed. They weren't shown to the player in a very intuitive way. Like the only way to see upgrades was in game. You could not see upgrades out of the match, so you had to sit at some point in the match or in the practice arena. You had to sit and read through everyone's abilities. You couldn't do that on their hero page. You could only see their like base abilities in the descriptions, and so that was one issue. There was not a ton. There was definitely UI in place to tell you when you had level up points. It wasn't super like in your face, which I like in some regards because it's not super in your face. In other regards, it probably led to people being a bit more confused. There was also the whole talent system, which had a UI element in the bottom right that was always there, but you can only click on it after you hit level 5. And so the only difference between when you couldn't click on it and when you could is that it went from having a lock icon over it to having like a 5 icon, and it like flashed a bit. And so there was a lot of like they really tried. You could tell how hard they tried to portray the game and like to give people all the information they needed to play it. But it was just kind of a swing and a miss.
Yeah, and you had creatures too. So there's like a whole other element to learn. Like, where do I summon this? Like, does this actually work here? But that was also like kind of the fun of like figuring those things out. But most people just would run right past the summoning circles and not even do that. Like many games, I'm like, oh great, guess I'm on summon duty again.
Yep, and then like you only had a limited amount of creatures, so you didn't want to be on summon duty for every point because it's like I can't summon any more bloomers, guys. I only have 2 bloomers. Someone has to summon a point. There was definitely, I think creatures were a really great mechanic. I don't think they were implemented super well just because of like the way they interacted with power mostly, because it was like there were points where like upgrading a creature was throwing the game because if they kill it, they get such a huge power swing that they just can win from there. There were points where summoning a creature at all was throwing the game because they would kill it. And so while yes, that sometimes could be shown as like, hey, this is it's an advanced mechanic to decide whether or not to summon or upgrade a creature. In reality, it just led to a lot of people summoning and upgrading creatures that then died and then threw the game.
And fed power.
Exactly.
Yeah, and like, you know, I definitely give them credit for trying a lot of different things. I remember how they did power change throughout like the entire game's life cycle, how creatures were summoned changed. They even changed the maps and like positions of the giant monsters. At first, on one of the big maps, actually, no, all of the maps, the Guardians were very far back.
Yep.
And no one could even get to them when the time came. It took forever to get across the map. They realized that pushing them forward made the games like take a little shorter time, and it was a lot easier for people to be like, oh, there's the giant monster. I don't have to go to a death trap to get to it. Now I'm going to go to it. So in a way, like, I'm really glad that they did end up refining a lot of the things, but it was unfortunately like a little too late at that point.
Yep, little too late. And they couldn't like I do think that if they weren't chained by the 1 month approval time, they probably could have like I mean, I have a philosophy in just anything. When I want to improve something, it's rapid iteration. It's just like, try something, didn't work, try something else, didn't work, try something else. Cool, that works, move on to the next thing. And I think like if they could have just been constantly be like, okay, put out this update. 2 weeks later, Guardians are too close, move them back a couple feet. Still too close, move them back a more. And just kind of like really fine-tuned a lot of the pieces of the game. They probably could have gotten into a better point. The moving the Guardians forward was a double-edged sword, because yes, it made games take less time, but it made Guardians a lot more intrusive. So like you'd be trying to storm the enemy's back point, and you just can't because the Guardian is shooting you.
Oh my god.
And Guardians were really, really strong.
Let's talk about Guardians for a second.
Oh yeah. Okay.
All right. Yeah, these Guardians. You would be walking along, the Guardians are rampaging, bam, you're freaking dead because you got hit by like a giant AoE that murdered you in the head.
Yep.
Or you'd be walking along and the Guardian would come out of nowhere and hit you out of the air. Like, that happened to me so many times. Or the Guardian would go to pin the other Guardian and they would get stuck in a spinning animation and no one could hit it, and that would be it. You would have to leave the game if that happened.
Yeah.
I think that might have happened to me once. That wasn't super common, but
it wasn't super common.
Not good.
Man,
when
was
it
it
happened.
game breaking.
Well, I guess we all have to leave. Who leaves last, they win.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of
Yeah,
problems with the Guardians. Like, I still, same with creatures. I think the Guardians were such a cool idea conceptually, and I could talk for hours about the ideas I have for how to make Guardians more, but I won't do that here. But I think a lot of issues people had with them is that they did too much and also too little at the same time. Like, they did too much damage, so it was basically, if you got close to them, you couldn't pursue people close to their Guardians, because the amount of DPS they could put out is insane. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because your base should be a safe haven for you to retreat to. But since they were so close to the battle now, after they moved them up, it made it really hard to kill people, because they could just, because the TTK in Gigantic was high, and I still stand by that's like my favorite part about the game compared to other games, besides the movement, is the fact that the TTK was more than 16 milliseconds. But because it was so high, combined with the fact that Guardians were so close after the change, you could just run back to your Guardian, and it's like, well, guess I can't get that kill, even though I chased them all around the map and I like did all these cool things. They still just got back to their Guardian, and it doesn't matter. And it was even worse for people like Amani, on Ghost Reef. She could literally sit under her Guardian and have line of sight to most of the map, and you couldn't do anything because she was underneath the Guardian and you could not hit her. I suggested a lot of things to the devs in that they never did it with, of doing things like making the Guardians do less damage but more kind of like displacement. So like I suggested, instead of when you run up to the Guardian they just nuke you and kill you and give the enemy power, instead they just shove you back to like the middle of the map. Basically they just throw you across the screen, and it would basically keep the functionality of them being safe havens to retreat to, but wouldn't also give you the other team power, which goes back to the fact that power was not a great system. So there's a lot of things that there's a lot of things about the game that interwove to cause just this mess of a great game mode conceptually, but one that just missed the mark in so many ways that it just cascaded down to the game failing.
All right, well, I think that's gonna about wrap it up. I think we've hit all the topics that we were going to, and more than we were going to as well, which is good. It's a good thing. But before this spirals into just talking about the gameplay issues with Gigantic,
actually, let's talk about
let's start wrapping it up here. TurtleDuck and Failco, I'll give you guys an opportunity to make your last comments, and you can plug any social media you want to. If you have a Twitch or YouTube channel, or I don't even, whatever you got, go ahead. So TurtleDuck, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I have a Twitch, twitch.tv/TheTurtleDuckMan. I don't stream a ton there, but I am planning on streaming Project Stamina basically every day when it comes out. So look forward to that, I guess. You can follow me on Twitter at TheTurtleDuckMan without the N, because Twitter doesn't let me have all of my characters. It's very annoying. But yeah, just look out for me in the Project Stamina community. I'm always love talking with people. Thanks so much.
Right on. And Failco?
Hi. Thanks a lot for allowing me to be on your awesome YouTube show. And I'm FailcoPunch everywhere. So if you're looking for me on Twitter, I'm there. And I'm also going to plug Project Stamina. Check our website out, projectstamina.com, and you'll be hearing a lot more news from us, the entire team, Project Stamina, on Twitter very soon. So yeah, yay!
Right, it's good to hear. Woo! So that's going to wrap it up. Talking about these kind of things is beneficial because it does help teams like Project Stamina avoid some of the potholes, some of the sand pits and pitfalls, whatever you want to call them, that Motiga fell into. And let's hope that they don't. And if you are interested in Project Stamina, like I said, I'll have all their social media linked down in the video description below. But for now, this is the Mangoose signing off. You guys have a good one.
Bye.
Mangoose.